Hi, good afternoon, everyone. This is Board Certified Immigration Attorney Sasha Westerman Kuning, and today I am going to be doing a little video on immigration marriage fraud and why it is never a good idea. And I wanted to talk about this topic today because I actually am working right now on an appeal of a denial of a case based on allegations of prior marriage fraud. And it just got me thinking that during these times of desperation is often when we see people most prone to falling victims of the trap that is immigration marriage fraud. And I call it a trap because it often seems like it is the best idea for somebody who has no other options. But as you're going to see from the course of this video, it really never is a good option for anybody. And I'm going to go over why that is so. I often have people come in to me for consultations, and the reality is they really don't have any options available to them. They're not qualified for any employment-based visas. They don't have any family members in the US that can petition for them. They don't really have an asylum case. They just don't have any legal avenues to be able to live in the United States. But that isn't to say that their lives in their home country are great and that they don't have reasons why they want to move to the United States. Sometimes people have, really do have problems in their home country, but it's just not enough to justify an asylum case, or sometimes they have businesses in the home country, but it's not enough to be able to get a business visa here. So, they just fall into these traps of marriage looking as the best option. Now, I do hundreds of marriage cases every year, marriage fiance visas. This is probably my biggest specialty, especially in regards to the LGBTQ community, but I do tons of straight marriage cases too, guys. I don't discriminate against straight people, but it's something I do more than the average immigration attorney. It's my bread and butter, marriage cases, and I know so much about marriage-based processing and unfortunately appeals of denials of marriage cases. A lot of people come to me after their marriage cases go badly, and it's just, like I said, it seems like an attractive option, but it never truly is. And I'm going to go over the details right now about why marriage fraud is never a good idea, even when you're desperate, okay? Now, first of all, we have a law that was implemented in 1996 called the Marriage Fraud Amendment Act. Don't quote me 100% on the language of that act. But basically, that is the act that made marriage-based green card processing a two-step process, meaning that most people getting their green cards through marriage are only going to receive what we call a 2-year conditional resident card. And after 2 years of having their green cards, they need to prove to the government yet again that their marriage was a real bona fide marriage. So a lot of people just think, I'm gonna, commit marriage fraud. I'm gonna, fake a lease together. I'm gonna fake a few accounts together. And when I get my green card, it's gonna be over with. It's not over with getting your green card, because 99% of people are gonna only get a 2-year conditional green card. And then 2 years from then, immigration is gonna wanna see everything the couple has been doing to join their lives together as a married couple. And a lot of people actually get caught on step 2, not on step 1. So we have a 2-step process. They get to look at marriage fraud at 2 different levels. And because of this, it's just so dangerous to go down that avenue. A lot of people don't understand, because they're not working with lawyers, that getting the initial green card is only step 1. And there's going to be a whole other marriage verification when that conditional 2-year green card is expiring, that you again are going to have to show with even more evidence, frankly, of your marriage, because they expect at that point that the couple has kind of moved forward in their lives. Maybe they bought a house together, they got a dog together, maybe they had a baby together. At that point, the person has had their green card for 2 years. So they expect that, you're working here, you're traveling with your spouse, you have done things to further join your accounts and buy properties, cars together, all of these different things. So I actually tell people I think there's a higher evidentiary standard on the second green card than there is on the first green card, because a lot of times if the first green card case is processed very quickly, sometimes my clients don't even have their social security number at the time we're getting to their green card interview. So sometimes they can't be added to their spouse's bank account because they don't have their social security number yet. Things like that. They may have not been able to travel outside the US because they were waiting for their green card to be issued. So maybe the American spouse has not gone to the home country to visit the family of the other person. These are all things they expect that you've done now that the person has their green card during that 2-year conditional residency period. So in first place, we have a 2-year conditional residency period for all marriage cases, which makes it a commitment to do marriage fraud. When people come into me and they want to commit marriage fraud, I try to make them understand that with the initial processing time, which, it often takes a year or more to go through the initial green card processing, plus the 2 years of that conditional residency, and then our process of what we call removing the conditions from that 2-year conditional green card often takes another 12 to 18 months. When you do all the math on that, you're looking at a 3.5 to 4 year minimum commitment of having a fake marriage on paper with someone, having joint bank accounts, having them on your retirement plan, having a fake lease together. I mean, it is a huge commitment to make to fake documents for such a huge amount of time. And so when people start really getting to the details, they start to understand that this is not a simple idea that they're having. And of course, with technology and it's becoming even harder, I think, to fake marriage cases because, for example, I read a denial letter of a second green card that somebody brought to me, and the immigration had pulled their customs and border protection records. And the records showed that the person was frequently traveling in and out of the United States with another woman, a foreign woman, and not with their wife. And the denial letter said, we think this woman is really your girlfriend, and that your wife is not really, is not really a real marriage. And they were able to put those pieces together on their own from their own records of entries and exits. So, I mean, they can really have such access to an immense amount of information that it's very easy for them to put these things together. Now, when you do green card processing, for many years now already, you have to go in for a digital photo and fingerprint at the local USCIS office. Now, our understanding is that they're using those digital photographs to be able to run photos through facial recognition software. So they can basically search the entire internet for your photo. So you could be standing, for example, in the background of somebody else's photo posted publicly, on Instagram, let's say, and you could come up standing with another woman that's not your wife in the background of that photo, and the facial recognition software could pick you up in that photo. So, sometimes people say to me, oh, I'm not on Facebook, I'm not on Instagram, I got no social media, so they're never going to be able to figure it out. And I'm like, well, if anyone posts a public photo, you could still come up in facial recognition software. So you're not protected just by not having your own accounts. And so there's just so many ways now that they can really figure these things out. Now, it's never happened to me in a marriage interview, but I've had a few people come in for consultations that were unrepresented at their marriage interviews. They had no lawyer, and they were asked to show their cell phones to the officer. And all these cases were denied because on the cell phones, it showed, just by pulling up the most recent text messages and call records, that the person was not really living with the person that was supposed to be their spouse. There were text messages about meeting at the immigration office. Just the text history did not look normal for a normal married couple. I'm sure all you married people out there know if you text a million times a day with your spouse. So, it's unusual not to have a huge chain of text or phone calls with your spouse. And that they were able to just discern that from simply looking at a cell phone. So, they have all of these tools now that they can really use to even further detect marriage fraud. So why do I say, never, ever, ever commit marriage fraud? Now, that's the part I really want to explain. Now, we have a law, it's section 204, subsection C of the Immigration and Nationality Act, I'm just going to read it and then I'm going to explain it. And it says, no petition shall, and the word shall is very important, no petition shall be approved if the alien has previously been accorded or sought to be accorded an immediate relative or preference status as the spouse of a citizen of the United States or as the spouse of an alien lawfully admitted for permanent residence by reason of a marriage determined by the Attorney General to have been entered into for the purpose of evading the immigration laws, or two, that the Attorney General has determined that the alien has attempted or conspired to enter into a marriage for the purpose of evading the immigration laws. So what did that mumbo jumbo just mean? Basically, what that said is that no petition shall be approved. And I always repeat that language when I'm doing consults with people because I need people to understand that this is mandatory language under the law. The word shall means mandatory. It means there's no discretion. It means that if they think it's marriage fraud, no petition shall be approved, meaning they must deny the petition. No petition shall be approved if the alien has previously been accorded, which just means they were granted or they've sought to be accorded, sought to be granted, an immediate relative, so that's spouses of U.S. citizens, or preference status, those are spouses of residents, of green card holders, by a reason of a marriage determined by the Attorney General. Now, it's not the Attorney General himself that has to determine your marriage is not real. The Attorney General has delegated those powers to USCIS. So, substitute Attorney General with USCIS. They have the power to make that determination on behalf of the Attorney General. To have been entered in, to have, by a reason of a marriage determined by the Attorney General, to have been entered into for the purpose of evading the immigration laws, or the Attorney General has determined that the alien attempted or conspired to enter into a marriage for the purposes of evading immigration laws. So that basically means that if the USCIS determines that the marriage was entered into to get papers, that they must deny the petition. Now, if you noted, I was emphasizing a few words when I was talking there, the words attempted and conspired. So this law is so broad that you actually do not even have to get married. You can attempt to enter a marriage, it means you never actually married the person, and still be prohibited from having petitions approved. You can also conspire and never complete the act and still be barred under this. And so it is a very broad law. Because sometimes I'll have people, they got married, but they never filed any papers with immigration, so I think they're safe. Now, I've had immigration come back to me and say, it does not matter whether the person actually filed papers or not, because the attempt or the conspiracy is enough to support a denial of a future petition. So every once in a while, I'll have someone that never even applied for any immigration benefits from a prior marriage, but the immigration will still use that prior marriage to deny a future petition because they determined that that marriage was entered into to obtain immigration benefits, even though the person never even applied for an immigration benefit. So that's how scary Section 204C really is. It's so broad, and it penalizes really even thoughts of attempting to commit marriage fraud, not even marriage fraud itself. You don't have to file any paperwork to fall under this bar. So it's extremely prohibitive. Now, it says no petition shall be approved. So when does this usually come into play? It comes into play more for not the actual marriage fraud case, the marriage that I entered into that was not real. It usually comes into play more when people have second marriages or another petition from a family member. And that petition, that second petition, is being denied because of marriage fraud on a prior marriage. So because it says no petition shall be approved, it's any petition, a petition from my mom, petition from my adult U.S. citizen child who's petitioning me, a petition from a future spouse, a work-based petition. It's any petition. So it's not just a new marriage case or the marriage case that was the fraudulent marriage. It's any future petition. And I always explain this to people when they come into my office and they want to commit marriage fraud. I always tell them, first of all, we do not file any cases where we even suspect marriage fraud because we're not going to jeopardize our law licenses nor our reputation to help people commit fraud. But in addition to that, for the person's own well-being, I try to explain to them that even if your mom becomes a U.S. citizen and files a petition for you, or your adult child becomes a U.S. citizen and files a petition for you, even if you remarry and you have 3 kids with that new spouse, and there's no question that you're in a real marriage with your second spouse, if they determine that a prior marriage was entered into for the purposes of immigration benefits, that future petition is barred, and there is no waiver for marriage fraud. So you will never, ever, ever get a green card if you fall under Section 204C under a normal petition process. I mean, there's still other avenues towards green cards that could be available, like asylum, but in a normal green card petition process, whether it's based on employment petitions or family petitions, you will never be able to get a green card again. So it's extremely scary how broad and how forever impacting marriage fraud can be to a person's immigration case. And the problem is when you talk to a lot of people on the streets, they will say, oh, just marry somebody, just marry somebody. Or here in South Florida, marry a Cuban, marry a Cuban, marry a Cuban. These provisions apply to spouses of Cubans as well. And I've had many people who had a fake Cuban marriage in the past and are getting barred under this petition. And so it's very, very scary how broad it is. And there's really no way to fix it once you are in this Leo, once you're in this what's the word I can use in English? Once you're in this cascadia of marriage fraud, everything begins to crumble, and often there's no way to get yourself out of this hole that you have dug for yourself. And I always tell people, listen, I get it. I get that people are desperate. People are fleeing really bad conditions, economically, politically, violence, and they don't see another way. And I agree with them. Our legal immigration system is so limited. Most people do not have options outside of marriage to obtain status in the United States. And I always tell people, we have a system that breeds marriage fraud. I can be a medical doctor, but if I fall out of status at some point and I can't do an employment petition, falling out of status, really the only way to cure that outside of being the parent of an adult U.S. citizen child is through marriage. So there are just so many people who have fallen out of status, and their only recourse to gain a green card will be an immediate relative petition, which, is a very small classification: spouses of U.S. citizens, people who are minor children of U.S. citizens, which obviously doesn't apply to people I'm talking about, and then people who have adult U.S. citizen children. U.S. citizens' children are over 21 years old. So, if I don't have any children pass out of the way, or if I have a 5-year-old, 16 years before that 5-year-old can apply for me. So I am left with just marriage as my only way to legalize status. So, I don't blame people at all for wanting to do marriage fraud. The system is designed to force people into the marriage route, but it is such a dangerous path to commit marriage fraud. And so I just don't think this is spoken about enough, because you hear, this is what happens. I have people come in and they're like, but my friend did it, and his friend did it, and this friend did it, and fulano ese did it, and John Doe did it. And I'm just like, that's great. First of all, that was 10 years ago, so we didn't have all the technology we had. We also weren't living under the Trump administration immigration. And I also just tell them that person got lucky. They didn't get a difficult officer. They got through it no problem. And I always tell them, you don't see people walking down the street being like, hey, I committed marriage fraud, I got caught, and now I've been deported. People don't run around advertising that. The people who got away with it are the ones that are like, it's so easy, I got away with it. But those are not the people coming to my office. I'm seeing all the people who didn't get away with it, who are now dealing with these lifetime consequences. And I always tell you, when I'm doing a consult, you just don't know which side of the equation you're going to end up on. Are you going to be with someone who gets away with it without any issues? Or are you going to be someone who gets caught and is permanently barred from getting your green card? You just don't know. And it's when you do a cost benefit analysis, the risk of being caught and the risk of having that lifetime bar is so high that it's just not worth it. My advice to people in my consults always is like, go on Match.com and date someone for real for 6 months, and then we can do a marriage case. But just date someone for real. There's somebody out there for everybody. Don't just go and marry somebody for papers. Now, of course, the most egregious types of marriage fraud cases are those where someone is literally getting paid to marry a foreigner. Yes, of course, those cases exist. They're usually big fraud rings. Almost all those rings get busted eventually. I recently had a few cases come in where the people, they haven't been caught yet, but the person who filed their papers was already indicted for a marriage fraud ring of setting up people. The most recent one I saw was Cubans being set up to marry Eastern European women. And the person hasn't had their interview yet, but I told, we Googled the person who filed their papers online, and I told them it's very clear that they already know there's a fraud ring and you're going to get caught. And so it's just so dangerous because it may not even be about you. It could be that immigration starts seeing a pattern of practice of a certain, these are usually not attorneys, usually notarios, non-lawyers pretending to be lawyers, or non-lawyers acting as lawyers, which is illegal in and of itself, but who will pair you up with someone to marry. And those are the riskiest cases because often there's federal indictments against the person, and the person will give a list to the government of every fake marriage case they held. And trust me, your name will be on that list because they will put every name on that list to cut their sentencing time and to cooperate with the government. Everybody does it. Every lawyer recommends to their clients to do it because it is in their best interest to sing the whole song once they're caught to decrease sentencing. So, don't think that the person's not going to throw you under the bus if they're faced with criminal sentencing. They will, they always do, and you will become a victim of their crime. Now, what I see more often than actual, paid fraud rings, I mean, they do exist, but I would say they're much less common than what I see, which is friends, good-natured friends marrying somebody for a green card because they want to help them out because they feel badly for them, and they, obviously understand the system's unfair and the person has no other options. And I get that. I get that those people are doing it out of the kindness of their heart and that they want to help their friend or their coworker or someone they go to church with, whatever the case may be. But I still always tell them friends should not be doing this for a multitude of reasons. The first being that no matter how good of a friend that person is, they can always turn their back on you. If, and this happens a lot in immigration interviews, especially people that are not represented by lawyers, they'll separate the couple and they'll put pressure on the American citizen that they know it's marriage fraud, and they'll tell them, we're going to charge you criminally unless you file this withdrawal and admit to the marriage fraud, in which case we will not take any action against you as the U.S. citizen, and we will just obviously go after the foreigner. And let me tell you, all the U.S. citizens sign that shit right away. Oh, pardon my French. But all the U.S. citizens sing the praise, because as soon as they're threatened with criminal charges on marriage fraud, they don't care whether they've been your friend for 10 years or not. They're not going to go to jail for you, and they're going to sign that withdrawal and admit to the marriage fraud right away. And I see them because we get copies of what we call FOIAs, Freedom of Information Acts. We get the full file from immigration. There'll be signed statements, signed sworn statements from the American admitting to marriage fraud. And when you talk to the American, they're always going to say that they were put under duress to sign these statements and threatened with prosecution and all of these different things. And so, it can be your best friend, but your best friend will fold under the right circumstances. This is why we have so many laws in regards to forced confessions, because people, when they are pressured by government officials, will admit to things and sign things because it's human nature. So, like I said, this more often comes up in the context of friends trying to help friends than paid fraud rings. And the other thing I try to explain to people is that because there's this huge commitment that I was talking about at the beginning, that you have to go through the entire green card process, you have to go through that conditional 2-year residency period. Often it's just too long of a commitment for someone. I've had people where they married their friend, and then 2 years after, 2 years into the process, a year after the person got the green card, the friend gets, pregnant by their actual boyfriend, that they have, that's not their husband. And now they're like, I want to get divorced because we want to get married before the baby gets born. And as much as they love you as their friend, they're going to do what's best for them because, again, that's human nature. And now you are caught with the fact that there's going to be a birth certificate with some other guy's name on it that was with a child that was conceived when you were supposed to be married to this person. And things like this happen all the time. I've witnessed it so many times. And so, people, and I actually had a friend, and I see here that there's some people that are friends with this person who came up to me at a party and said that her boyfriend had married a friend of his for the woman's papers. So he was a US citizen. He wasn't the foreigner. And my friend is a very public person. She was on a reality TV show, and she, is a performer and does red carpets. And she said to me, I want my boyfriend to be able to come out with me on the red carpet and all of these different things. And I want to be able to be public on Instagram and Facebook. And he keeps telling me that he can't do any of this stuff because he's about to file this green card for this other woman that he's married to. And she told me, what do you think? And I told her, listen, I always going to counsel against marriage fraud. I think it's stupid. I think you have a right to want to have your boyfriend, with you at public events. And I told her, again, if you do have that, it could definitely lead to a marriage fraud finding for his friend. And when I knew that they hadn't filed the papers yet, I told him, listen, he should just not go forward with it and file the papers. And the reason I bring up that story is because, eventually she did convince him not to go forward with the papers for her friend. And the point is that this guy was very good friends with this woman he married. He really wanted to help her. When it came down to choosing between his real girlfriend and his friend, he chose his real girlfriend, which you should. That's normal. So it could be that your friend loves you to death and wants to help you, but there could be outside pressure from a third party. They could start dating someone new, and this new person's like, what do you mean you have these joint accounts with this, random person? This person is your spouse, this and that. And they start pressuring you to divorce the person because I've had people that got proposals, while they were fake married to someone, and they wanted to marry that person. I actually had a personal friend. I was a bridesmaid in a wedding where I was the only person who knew that the marriage between the people were not legal because my best friend was married to an Australian guy that she was helping with his papers. She married him before I became an immigration lawyer. This is a million years ago. But oh my God, if this was today, I would have been like, girl, you are crazy. You can never do this. But it was already done. And her real marriage to her real husband actually didn't happen legally for like a year after the wedding because he was still in a conditional residency process, and she did not want to leave her friend in a lurch. She was very nice. She didn't want to leave her Australian friend in a lurch. And so she stayed on paper, and her real husband was understanding about it because he comes from an immigrant family himself. But, it was just unusual circumstances. They were not legally married for an extra year. And, her Australian friend just got lucky that she was so sympathetic and did not leave him in this bind by divorcing him before the conditional residency period expired. And so, anyways, I just use these examples because I have so many of them. And unfortunately, in my work, which I mentioned earlier, that I specialize in marriage cases in the LGBTQ community, I see so many where people have had prior heterosexual marriages where they've tried to get papers to those marriages. They were determined to be marriage fraud, and now they're happily married to a same-sex partner. And often there's nothing I can do to cure the case because the record is too strong on prior marriage fraud. Usually these records will have a sworn statement from the US citizen that there was marriage fraud in the past. And we just have no way of overcoming those statements. And I have to have these really heartbreaking conversations with these couples at the fact that they will never get a green card in the United States because 10 years before, when they were 24 and naive and young, they entered into this fake marriage thinking it was going to be easy to get papers. It wasn't easy. And they were then, slapped with this marriage fraud allegation, which continues to follow them throughout their entire immigration history. So it never goes away. You could apply 30 years later when your child is an adult US citizen, and if you have a fake marriage finding from 30 years in the past, they're going to deny that petition because they have to, because of the mandatory language of Section 204C. So I just hope that people really take this to heart. Like I said, in times like this, we see people getting desperate, and desperation leads to marriage fraud. but it is such a dangerous path and can often cut off your eligibility for immigration benefits permanently. This appeal I'm working on, I really hope we can win it because I don't think it was marriage fraud. But this also happens. People who didn't commit marriage fraud get slapped with these allegations for life, and they can be so hard to overcome. Um, because when the government digs in its heels and they decide that something is marriage fraud, unless you have a huge amount of evidence to overcome that allegation, they will just keep on coming back at you and saying marriage fraud, marriage fraud, marriage fraud. In this particular case that I'm appealing, this is already going to be like the fourth time this man has tried to get a petition approved. And this petition happens to be a petition from his adult U.S. citizen daughter. He's married now to a gentleman, but that is not a marriage-based petition. The petition is through his daughter, and they're denying his case based off a 2004 marriage to a woman who they determined was marriage fraud. I think from the facts of the record that it wasn't marriage fraud. In this particular case, it appears that this gentleman was just in the closet at the time of his prior marriage. And I'm hoping we can prove that. But so far, he's been fighting for a green card for more than 15 years, and they keep on denying going back to this 2004 marriage, which they believe was fraud. And so it's very frustrating for people to be told that sometimes this is in a permanent end to any green card status, because a lot of people do it, like I said, out of desperation. I had a case where I appealed. The people came to me way after the case had been too screwed up. It was a very nice, a couple of very elderly Brazilian men. One of the Brazilians was a naturalized U.S. citizen, and they were, I would say, in their late 70s. And at the time, the Defense of Marriage Act was still in place, so they couldn't get married and they couldn't do a petition, but they have been partners for many, many years. And eventually, they got desperate because they were both HIV positive. They needed health insurance and all these other benefits that they could not get because could not get the Brazilian, who was not the U.S. citizen, because of a lack of social security number, things like that. And so they married, or one of the guys, the Brazilian guy, married a U.S. citizen and tried to get his papers through the U.S. citizen marriage, and it didn't. The interview went horribly. This was like back in 2009. And fast forward, Defense of Marriage Act fell, and they were able to marry one another, and they moved forward with a petition. They didn't have a lawyer, and they got to the interview, and they were like, you committed marriage fraud back in 2009, and they admitted to the marriage fraud because they didn't understand that this was a lifetime prohibition. They thought there has to be like a forgiveness somewhere, somehow. And they explained the situation, that they were really worried about the husband because he couldn't get his HIV medication. He needed to get on health insurance, and he needed to do this, and he needed to do that. And the officer was actually super nice that wrote the denial letter, being like, we think you're such a nice person. We understand why you did this. We understand that the law was so unfair at the time that you couldn't get married legally because there was no same-sex marriage back then. And it was such a nicely worded letter. But at the end of the letter, it was, but your case is denied under 204C. And we appealed it. And I told them it was a long shot, but because not only like was there evidence of marriage fraud from the first interviews itself, but they admitted under oath in sworn statements that they committed marriage fraud, and that the Brazilian U.S. citizen had helped his Brazilian husband commit marriage fraud, like actively, with this U.S. citizen woman. And we appealed it up to the Board of Immigration Appeals, and they wrote a really nice denial letter too, being like, we think we are so sympathetic to your reasons and your desperation behind what you did, but there is no wiggle room in the law on this issue, so we are forced to deny your case. And it was like just such a nice letter. Usually they don't write nice things in the denial letters, but this one had, like, you could tell, like, it pained the person to write the denial letter. But the reason I bring this up is just to show that there's absolutely no discretion or wiggle room. Once they determine marriage fraud, you are just permanently barred from a future petition. There are some like creative ways that we get out of that, being the derivative of somebody else's petition because you have no petition on your own. I said that a Cuban marriage can prohibit you, if it's a fake Cuban marriage initially, from a new case. But on the reverse, marrying a Cuban after a fake marriage case, if it's a real marriage to that Cuban, you can, in theory, still get your case approved. You still need a general fraud waiver, but you can waive general fraud. You just can't waive this prohibition under Section 204C. But because when you are applying as a spouse of Cuban, there is no new petition. It's just an application for adjustment. 204C doesn't attach because there's no new petition. So there's a little tiny bit of wiggle room there, but it's so tiny and only applies to a handful of people. For the most part, people are going to be barred for life. So anyways, I hope this was informative to people. And, if you hear people talking about faking marriages, I'm going to post this video on my YouTube channel. You can always go back to it. You want to make them understand that that's never a good idea. Like I said earlier, I tell people it's so much easier to go online, go to Tinder, go to Grindr, go to Match.com, whatever floats your boat, really date somebody. It doesn't need to be forever, ever. That's the idea when we get married, but a decent relationship will get you through the marriage process. It just has to be a real relationship where you intend to, be in that relationship indefinitely. If it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. The law doesn't penalize you for failed relationships, just penalizes you for fraudulent relationships when a relationship never exists. So, there's just ways to do it the right way by actually dating somebody versus faking a marriage. So anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and please take care of yourselves, and always feel free to go to my website, email me with any questions, follow-ups. If you guys have a topic that you want me to discuss, please contact me. I'd be happy to do a video on whatever you guys want to hear about. All right, take care. Have a wonderful day.